Every emotion serves a purpose. And when we embrace all of our emotions, as it turns out, they provide amazing insight into what we're feeling, why we're feeling that way, into our personal growth. They take us out of our comfort zone.
Welcome to the Curious Advantage podcast, an exploration of the idea of curiosity and its increasing importance for thriving in the digital age, from the authors of The Curious Advantage.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Curious Advantage podcast. This series is about how individuals and organisations use the power of curiosity to drive success in their lives and businesses, especially in the context of our new digital reality. It brings to life the latest understanding from neuroscience, anthropology, history, business and behaviourism about curiosity, and makes these useful for everyone. My name is Simon Brown. I'm one of the co-authors of the book The Curious Advantage and Chief Learning Officer at Novartis. And today I'm here with my co-author, Paul Ashcroft.
Hi there.
Garrick unfortunately can't join us today. We're delighted to be joined though by Scott Peltin. Scott is the founder and Chief Performance Officer of Tignum, a company that helps executive clients achieve their full potential. He is an internationally renowned coach and presenter on sustainable human performance, and he's personally coached numerous high-performing CEOs and top leaders in Fortune 100 companies, as well as professional athletes and sports teams to improve their energy, their focus, resilience, and effectiveness. Prior to founding Tignum in 2003, Scott worked in the US Fire Service for over 25 years, serving on the front line as a firefighter and captain, and later leading his crews as a battalion and division chief. The link from firefighting to big business may not be as big a leap as one might think, as I'm sure many of you listening spend your days putting out fires or trying to rescue things. Scott's also co-author of the book Sink, Float or Swim, Sustainable High Performance Doesn't Happen by Chance, It Happens by Choice, which provides simple proven strategies for surviving the modern business world. I personally met Scott several years ago when I took part in one of his sustained high impact programs. I must admit that it did have a lasting impact. I'm still applying many of the lessons learnt today. Also still check back regularly on my to be vision, which I have on my phone here, which Scott will recognise. So it's something I created as part of the program. I'm sure we'll talk more about that later on as well. We've also had over 1,000 Novartis associates listen to Scott's advice on curiosity as part of our Curiosity Month in 2020. So welcome to the Curious Advantage podcast, Scott.
Thank you. It's such a joy to be here. I'm curious about what we're going to talk about.
Very good. So let me kick off with maybe an obvious question from your intro, but I have to ask it. I'd love for you to share your personal journey going from a frontline firefighter in Phoenix to a coach of the world's top executives and professional athletes. So how did that happen?
Yeah, it's a crazy story, but for my whole life, my adult life, I always thought, I was pretty much a firefighter, which was all about high performance under high stress. How do you show up at your best and how do you recover so you can be your best for the next call and the next call? Because for each person that calls you, they're calling you on the worst day. And as I went through my career, I got my master's degree in performance psychology and exercise science. And so everything I did, I realized was around coaching and helping people be their best. Then I met my partner, Yogi Ripple, at a place called Athletes Performance that trains world-class and Olympic athletes. And he was on this quest to kind of help business professionals because his father had passed away from cancer literally 1 year after retiring. And I realized that a lot of what I had been doing to help firefighters and fire captains and command officers on the front lines of the fire service applied directly to business people, especially as I started to interview business people and they told me about how many fires they had to put out in a day and yet how little training they had to be able to do that. And, at the time we were talking about curiosity, we were curious, could you train business professionals like athletes? But really, when you look at the athlete model, an athlete has a performance once a week, maybe. They train the rest of the week. They have a huge support team around them to help them get ready and recover. And business professionals have none of that. And in fact, have 6 performances or 10 performances in a day. And so therefore, what we realized from that exercise of curiosity was we have to start from scratch and design systems to help business professionals show up at their best and go home at their best, which was equally as important to us.
Let's talk a little bit more about that. Really like the sort of unique perspective you bring about sort of the overlap between a performance athlete and their once a week performance to the daily performances we all as business people have to switch on demand, essentially. So tell us a bit more, how do you work with executives to help them achieve their potential in what's demanded of them each day?
Yeah, so we work with it in a lot of different ways. I mean, probably I think the coolest way we do it is we embed ourselves with a team, usually a very high value, high performance team, like some of the teams at Novartis that are looking at how you can create, develop drugs quicker, reimagine medicine in new and innovative ways like Data 42 and GDD and GDO, the Global Drug Development Group. And when you think about those groups, they're under immense pressure and they need huge amounts of curiosity. We call it also mental agility, the ability to look at things with a new light, to connect dots in new and innovative ways. And that requires a high-performing brain. And how do you show up with a high-performing brain when you're fatigued, whether it's cognitive fatigue or whether it's emotional fatigue that a lot of us have, even as kind of a side effect or a remnant of COVID in the world we live in. And so for those teams, we normally do some kind of onboarding. It can be virtual sessions. It could be in person, which people tend to think of as I go through a program. We don't really like the term program because something in our own mind says when you go through a program, you check it off, you've already done it, and you don't need to continue to invest in that topic. That doesn't really fit our topic of sustainable human performance. It's something you have to invest in every day. But then we coach them or we meet with the team and we look at some of the challenges they're facing. When we don't work with these type of, kind of intact teams, we bring people together and we do a similar thing. We onboard them and then we coach them one-on-one. And then we use our digital platform, Tignum X, because one of the things we know is that people need to have the advice. They need to have curated great information and tools that work because we're bombarded today with so much information and misinformation. And so when you need help, you want to know that some experts have curated it, that they've done the research, they've reviewed the research, they have great depth in coaching experiences that we can learn from each other. And so we support them that way.
And having a high-performance brain, I suspect, is something that everyone listening would be very keen to get. I know the brain is one key element of what you look at in the programs that you create or the coaching that you provide. So I know there's 4 elements in there, and maybe you could take our listeners through what those 4 are, so that they can understand how that contributes to sustained performance, but also to that high-performing brain.
Yeah, so at the core of our methodology is this DNA of this total integration of mindset, nutrition, movement, and recovery. And I'll throw a 5th one in there, which is preparation. But that's really even applying those same kind of strategies to that. So take something like, you wake up in the morning and your brain is a little foggy, you've been asleep. And so how can I apply strategies from all 4 of those? Well, we know that I could hydrate because my brain's in a dehydrated state. We know that it hasn't been eating for maybe, 9, 10, maybe 12 hours. So what am I going to do to feed it that way? But it also hasn't been primed with the right thoughts. So maybe I set my intentions for the day, or you mentioned earlier, Simon, reading your to-be vision, my statement about who I am at my best or who I aspire to be. So I prime my brain in the right way and I start to look at my day and visualize it and say, how am I going to show up as this person? I have back to back to back, where am I going to get my quick recovery break? So now I'm thinking about where I'm going to apply my recovery to have a high performing brain. And then me personally, and something we recommend is movement is such a great way to activate the brain, connect all different parts of the brain, which we need to be curious. We need to be mentally agile. So I'll get up and do some movement. Today I, did some intervals on the bike. Some days I just do some movements we call daily prep, which, integrate the brain by building mobility, stability, and balance. But I bring all 4 of those together to start my day strong. And then I try to look for ways throughout the day to apply little things from all 4 of those areas.
And I remember some of the tips from the sessions that we had together. And I mean, some of those definitely still lasting. So the hydration one, key, glass of water by the bed, drink that first thing in the morning. Every cup of coffee that I have during the day, there's a glass of water that goes with it, and trying to not have so much coffee and move to green tea and fruit teas and other pieces off the back of that to help the brain. But what other tips are there that people could put into practice like that are very, very actionable, seemingly small things, but really help in getting to that high performance?
Yeah, there's so many little things that add up to make a big difference. The one that I think is the super tool, I'll call it, because it leads into so many other things, is intention setting. So even before I would get on this podcast with you guys, or if I was in a one-on-one meeting or getting up to present, whatever those things, or going to a coaching call, I set my intentions. How do I want to be perceived? And a lot of times I build in mindset skills that I want to further develop as part of how I want to be perceived. One of those could be curiosity, compassion, empathy, listening. All those could be mindset skills that I want to develop further, focus. And then I ask, what do I want you to know about me? I want you to know that I'm passionate about this topic of curiosity. I want you to know that I care about how people show up, and I want to be able to help them make the biggest impact they can. And then most important, how do I want you to feel? And a lot of people miss that part, but how you feel, especially in this virtual world, is so critical. And if I'm clear in my mind, I prime my brain again, I don't need to think about those things anymore. I naturally act in a way that makes those things happen. Because in essence, the brain only has one job. Tell me what you want from me, and I will do everything consciously and unconsciously to help make that happen. But we often don't set those intentions, so we go in and we call it winging it, which is the anti of sustainable human performance.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to dig more into that, particularly on the connected health mind ideas that you were just talking about there, Scott. But you mentioned curiosity, and we've got to ask us sort of up front, we're here at the Curious Advantage podcast. So can you tell us, what does curiosity mean for you, and what role does it play as we're trying to, get to reach and keep that sustained performance that you're talking about?
Yeah. So, everything for us is around impact. How do you make the biggest impact in the areas, the moments in your day that matter the most to you, both at work and at home? And so in that sense, think about how curiosity intersects with that. Number one, if I'm going into a meeting, I'm assuming it's probably to solve a problem. Am I going to be able to solve the problem with the same thinking that I've had before, the same bias, the same traps that I've fallen into? Or do I need to be curious to look at, what if I'm wrong? What if there's another way? What if there's new information? All those types of things, we use curiosity. So again, I would use it as I would apply it to building my mindset. And then, of course, there's this curiosity about myself that I turn inwardly. Like, how is my energy? How am I feeling? Am I fatigued? Do I need to apply a strategy? Is it the right strategy? Is it the right strategy for emotional fatigue or physical fatigue or cognitive fatigue? So one of the things that we've noticed over this time lately is that a lot of the strategies that people have found to be helpful aren't working as well. And so therefore they lose faith in those strategies, like meditation or even getting up in the morning and doing exercise. And yet by 11 a.m., they feel tired again and they're exhausted and they wonder, does it not work anymore? But the point is, it works, but I'm curious to say, well, why am I fatigued then? Well, it turns out exercise is great for cognitive fatigue, great for physical fatigue, but as I get emotional fatigue during the day, I need an emotional recovery strategy. So that might be a breathing technique. That might be a quick mini meditation. It might be a visualization. It might be going out in nature. It might be calling a friend or journaling a teeny bit. So those strategies are unique and different, but by turning that curiosity inward and asking yourself, what do I need now? Why is this that I normally use not working as well? That's the type of curiosity we really encourage our clients to use.
That makes a lot of sense. And I wanted to touch on something you said there about going out, do exercise, move. The one thing that certainly I've experienced through the pandemic and the lockdown is that we're more isolated and more encouraged just to sit in front of a computer day in, day out and not move. What are some of the impacts that you've seen with the people you've worked with that the pandemic has had on their lives and their ability to keep front and center some of the things you're talking about here?
Yeah, well, I think what initially happened in the pandemic was people actually rallied. They got energized because it was a crisis that we all shared. But they underestimated how long it could last, right? So that initial adrenaline lasted about 6 weeks, and then we started to see fatigue start to creep in. But really what happened, if you think about it, is when I go to work, I have a system that I use, how I wake up in the morning, what I do to prepare, my commute, how I walk into the office, how I start my day. And so if your brain knows that, it's very comfortable and feels in control. Then the pandemic hits, and now I'm at home, and my kids are doing homeschooling right next to me. And all of a sudden, my brain still thinks I should be having a commute and going to work, and it has a plan that it wants to apply. But the problem is that plan won't work. That leads to a little sense of panic, right? Because now I'm out of control. My plan isn't working. What do I do? Something's not right. And the whole brain is designed to look for those moments and to say, like, we're in danger. Well, one of the things that we try to encourage people to do immediately is you have to create a new plan. You're only off of your plan if you don't have a plan for this situation. So let's start from scratch and redesign. How do you start your day? Where are you going to get your recovery breaks? How can I get my movement in if I can't go to the gym or I can't do this? Well, it doesn't mean I can't move. It just means I have to be creative. I have to figure out a new way that's going to work for me. Now that I have a plan for working at home, well, now suddenly my brain settles in, and most of us have experienced that. We're like, okay, I'm starting to feel good now about working at home. I'm in that rhythm. And then, of course, we said, well, now it's time to come back to the office. And then people freaked out again. And so I have to have a plan for hybrid work. When I go in a few days a week, or if I only go in for a half day, what does that look like? But in the absence of creating a plan, the brain has to wing it, and winging it by definition creates stress.
I remember one of the things that I learned from you before was around the transition point. And I used to have about a 20-minute, half an hour commute from the office to home. And remember sort of there was a mental piece of, okay, I'm now switching off from the office. And when I go home, and to your sort of setting out how you want to be, it's like when I come home, this is how I want to present myself. And you sort of relax your brain, if you like, and come home without the stresses of the day. I guess now it's a 5-second walk down the stairs and you're with the family and you don't have that transition point. So is there a way that something like that, I know a lot of people have struggled with, how do I switch off from one world, switch on to another world in a matter of moments? So there's some techniques that you can recommend for helping manage through that transition?
Absolutely. So it's actually funny because you dictate the amount of time that you want to transition. Just because you open the door and walk down the stairs or walk out into the other room doesn't mean that you had to. You know, we could put a sign on the door, which we'll have some clients do, that says, are you really ready? Right? And so maybe I pause for a second and I say, hold on now, let me do a work to home transition, even though I'm working from home. You know, maybe I set my intentions again. How do I want to be perceived? What do I want my family to know? How do I want them to feel? Maybe I do, I pull out my Tignum X, and one of the many things that we have on there are a mental imagery of going for a walk. And so even in my brain, I go through a walk through the woods. And as part of that, I'm walking through the woods to get from work to get to home. Or I listen to my work to home transition that you're familiar with, which is picturing me walking over a bridge, leaving my work and worries behind, coming home to a place where I want to be, dealing with things that may even be unexpected. But I have this mental transition. So coming back to the athletes, Paul, because you asked about athletes, think about the transition that an athlete has. They pull up to the stadium. They're in street clothes. They then go through a 2 to 3 hour transition to get ready for their game mentality, their game aura of who they need to be. You know, they go out, they go on the field, they do different exercises. And so they have quite a bit of time. Business people don't have that time. So we try to create tools that you can make that transition in 30 seconds. Now, the good news is, coming back to your situation, Simon, of being at home, the more we practice it, the more my brain goes, I know exactly what we're doing. I'm going right there. I just did a little breathing, a little visualization. I set my intentions, and my brain says, I know where we're going. We're going home. And already that makes a big difference. So again, it's not that it's impossible to do without the commute. It's just I have to change the way that I do it in order to apply that strategy.
I remember putting some of that into practice over the course of the last year, whereas when the pandemic started, it was very much sort of in the house or sitting on the patio working, but then going through that mental shift of, okay, this is now a long-term thing. Suddenly it was, okay, actually walking meetings that I used to do in the office, why can't I do a walking meeting at home? I've got a mobile phone, I've got a headset. It's like I can do that walking around through the local streets or into the woods. And that was a very conscious shift of actually, some of this stuff that I enjoyed before, actually I can do it under new conditions, under new ways, but there's no reason why working from home doesn't have to restrict having things like a walking meeting. And I've had quite a few meetings over the course of the last year where even having someone on camera on a Teams call and you're out walking in the countryside, and it makes for a very good mental break, and you're still probably even more productive than would be just sat staring at a screen. So
yeah, in many ways, working from home gives us a lot more freedom. Many people don't recognize that or take advantage of that freedom. I've had back-to-back meetings when I'm at home where literally I have 8 minutes to the next meeting. I go take a cold shower. And it sounds crazy, like cold shower in the middle, but I just know that I need a wake up. I need that stimulation. And because I'm home, I can do it. Nobody can see what I'm doing in my 8 minutes. And then I grab a quick snack, grab some water, and set my intention, sit back down. I'm ready to go. And people are like, God, this is like our 5th meeting I've seen you on. How are you so fresh? Well, I just applied some recovery strategies. I couldn't do that in the office.
Perfect. There's new things that you have to learn, I remember as well, that I did find I ran out of battery like half an hour from home, having done one of those walking meetings. So it's like, right, remember, take a spare battery for the phone to plug in and charge on the way.
Yeah, wouldn't it be nice if humans had a spare battery?
Absolutely.
Scott, listening to you does seem that you have, in your own mindset, got into a mode where you are constantly assessing, reassessing, setting into your intention, checking in with yourself around, what's my mindset? Have I moved? I presume, where am I in terms of my energy and my nutrition? And have I given myself time to recovery? But it's something that is not, you've done it at the start of the day and then you've reviewed at the end, or you've done it at the start of the week and you've reviewed at the end. You're doing it moment to moment throughout the day. Is that right? Could you tell me a little bit more about your experience, how you do that?
That's a really good takeaway. I mean, that is the essence of Tignum, to be honest, is it's something that you build into your day, you build into your life. And I apply it even when I'm on vacation, because I still need those things, because vacation has a purpose, right? So I approach it very purposefully, intentionally. And so what I love of what you just asked, Paul, is it can't be something that, and this is the problem when you go through a program, is you go, oh yeah, all this makes sense. Oh yeah, I've heard this before. It seems familiar. Check, done. And I always use the example, no one got more fit by sitting in the parking lot of a gym. You eventually have to go inside, and sustainable human performance is exactly the same. You have to apply the strategies, but the strategies that you need, and even your awareness is great, right? If I know that I'm starting to fatigue a little bit, not only can I apply a tool or strategy to change it, maybe I even change the way I approach that meeting. Like if I went into a meeting at 4 p.m. and I was feeling tired, what would be wrong with saying, hey guys, can we just take 3-minute break? Like I've been going. My brain's tired. I just need to get up and just move for a couple minutes. And now everybody starts to realize, oh my God, like I feel the same way. So I think that the red thread of everything we do is definitely awareness.
And you mentioned there about fatigue, and I think you hit the nail on the head that particularly now we work from home and more online, that we're so busy, taking time for recovery can be hard. And perhaps even we feel guilty about taking a moment for ourselves, taking time out, resetting. We know you have some strong views on recovery and you're sharing some of those. Could you tell us a little bit more about the importance of recovery, what that means and how to do it? Maybe some tips for how to just reset during the day.
Yeah. So, you guys can see, the audience won't see, but my t-shirt says the mindset shifter. So the funny thing about it is the first step of recovery, you hit the nail right on the head. You have to change our mindset about it. We tend to think of it as it either is an indication that I'm weak because I need a recovery break. It's a waste of time because I'm so busy and time is, all allotted, and so or I'm being lazy maybe even. But when you think about it, imagine an athlete. We know from athletics that they they can only focus for so long. That's why they have timeouts. That's why they have periods. That's why they have breaks. And yet in business, we act like we can go on. And we've all experienced, I sit down to write an email or to put together a document, and it should take me 15 minutes. And here I am 2 hours in, and I am erase, start over, and my brain's not working. So when you tell me you don't have time for recovery, I would add all those up and go, that's interesting because you had a lot of time for inefficient work. And so I really try, one of the things that we do at Tignum is get people to switch that thinking and look at recovery as a strategic must, not a nice to have. It's something that is required for me to show up at my best to make that impact. Then what I do for recovery can vary tremendously. So if I have emotional fatigue, it could be something as simple as listening to some music. Think about how music impacts our emotional state. If I have cognitive fatigue, as silly as it sounds, it could be doing a crossword puzzle, something that shifts my brain completely to a different task, a different type of problem solving. And then when I switch back to my work, my brain is reactivated. So again, there are so many things that I can do. Now, the cool way that we approach it is in these transitions that you asked about, Simon, like work to home transition, meeting to meeting transition, those transitions not only help me prepare for what's coming next, they help me recover from what I just came from. So it's like a pit stop in a Formula One race car. I pull in and quickly, as I get ready for what's coming next, I recharge I refill my fuel tanks, my emotional, cognitive, and physical fuel tanks. And now when I come out, I'm actually ready to go. Now, what's important about that is fatigue accumulates. So if I did that 4 times during the day, well, then I'm less fatigued when I walk in the door at the end of the day. And when you look at this accumulation of fatigue, what people miss is those little 5-minute breaks actually do make a big difference. And so that to me is important.
Absolutely. I just finished reading the book Blitzscaling by Reid Hoffman, and in there he talks about for founders of companies the same piece where you're just always on, and coming to this awareness that actually you need to stop for exercise, for free up your mindset and learning in order to if you're not taking the time to actually stop and learn as well as a leader, then you're going to have the same situation. You're going to get fatigued. You're not going to have the latest mindset, latest skills. It seems to be more and more important.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times, and I know like talking to Voss, your CEO and so many other leaders, they've shared that the same thing happens to them. I'm going from meeting to meeting, but yet in the back of my mind, I know that there's something I need to write or produce or put together a presentation or something that I'm preparing for. Then I go for a quick 20 to 30 minute walk. And here in Phoenix, we have great nature. So I go for a walk up this hill that I have near here. When I come back, that entire thing is written in my brain. Now, if I didn't do that, that doesn't happen. So instead, the stress that it's sitting on my back, waiting for me to accomplish it, to get it done, is just becoming a burden. But instead, when I go out for this recovery break, magically, my brain connects new dots. It asks better questions. It puts something new together. And I come back and I'm like, I'm so glad I went for that walk. And so that's another thing that you want people to realize. These aha moments happen during recovery. They don't happen during the grind.
You're listening to the Curious Advantage podcast, inspired by the book The Curious Advantage, written by Paul Ashcroft, Simon Brown, and Garrick Jones. Subscribe to the podcast today.
Important takeaway for our listeners there of don't feel guilty about taking the time out for that recovery, that to get your mindset into the right place, that's what will lead to better performance rather than just grinding on and not taking those breaks.
Absolutely. I mean, it's funny, if you look at firefighters and you have 2 teams, 2 crews that go on the same number of calls a day, and one group that is very conscious and aware of their recovery between calls, and you were to watch their behavior over the course of a shift, you would see completely different behaviors. Number 1, from the number of mistakes. Number 2, from the mood and the way they address stress and the activities they have to do. Number 3, in the way they communicate with each other. Number 4, in the way they go home the next day. And so that's one of the things that I recognized, on a fire truck, was my job as a captain was to make sure my crew got recovery throughout the day. Well, I think a leader of a team is exactly the same. You're the chief belief builder. You're the chief reframer. You're the chief recovery officer. So it's your job to make sure that everyone's showing up at their best to make the biggest impact.
Love that.
Scott, you have very nice ideas and techniques around energy multiplication. And it popped into my head when you talked about firefighting teams, which I'm not an expert, but my understanding is that happily, I think, firefighters are not usually spending all day, every day fighting fires. There's a lot of downtime. But in the moment, they are then called, they are on it, and they are there immediately. And essentially, there's no choice but to be performing at their best. Could you tell us a little bit about how, perhaps from a firefighter's perspective, but then in business, we can use this idea that you talked about being our own sort of energy multiplier?
Yeah, so I think the first part is the purposefulness of it, the intention to be an energy multiplier. I mean, it's incredible. But we know that a mindset is contagious. So when I take care of my mindset and how I'm going to show up, and I set those intentions of how I want to be perceived, then quickly what happens is it infects other people around me. Now, a leader's mindset is way more contagious because we are, as animals, always looking, even unconsciously, at our leaders, trying to figure out, am I safe? What are they thinking? Are we in danger? Are we good? Whatever. And so I think the energy multiplication starts with the purposefulness of setting that intention. Then, of course, how well can I manage or multiply other people's energy if I'm exhausted? I can see immediately the fatigue in the people around me. That doesn't energize me. So the fact that they're still smiling, the fact that they still have energy, the fact that I can see that they're just as committed to me, to making a high impact and being a high performer, that inspires me. Work, aligning, having clarity around our purpose, that's an energy multiplier. Getting those little recovery breaks, even when we do them together as a team, that's an energy multiplier. Being able to go home at my best and come back and share a story about going home, an energy multiplier. So I think that the concept of energy multiplication before COVID, we would say it was the viral spread of energy. We're very careful about that word viral now, but the purposefulness, the intentionality of doing that, and how I show up and wanting to add that energy is critical. But again, think about when you go to a meeting and someone's not prepared. It sucks the energy right out of it. But when someone is leaning forward, they did their homework, they came curious. One of the things that I read over last Christmas, after doing the curiosity talk, I went on a rampage of reading curiosity materials. In fact, read your guys' book too, which I loved.
Fantastic.
And one of the best statements I heard was, every relationship in our life dies when we lose curiosity. And I thought, oh my God, how true that is. When I assume that I know what my wife is thinking, I know what she's feeling, I already know what she's going to do in this situation, I'm not curious anymore, and a little bit our relationship dies. When I then change that to, I wonder what my wife's thinking, I wonder how she's feeling, and I ask her, and I start thinking about great questions, people come alive. When you ask someone about their work and what they do and their day and what they've achieved and the impact they make and why they love that work, your relationship grows. You multiplied their energy. So curiosity, as it turns out to me, is literally, and I'm not saying this just because I'm on this podcast, it is the great energy multiplier.
Love it. Yeah. And that's why we feel it's the greatest driver of value around that. Yep.
Totally
so,
agree.
Yeah, love it. Yep. You mentioned how things can suck the energy out. I know I've heard you talking about embracing the suck. So you'll have to tell more. What when you talk about embrace the suck, that sounds a bit sort of counterintuitive of embracing things that maybe don't go to plan. But tell us more about why we should embrace the suck.
Yeah, well, that approach comes from a lot of different angles, and some of it comes from when we worked with the elite special operations groups in the military. It's something they teach because obviously you're going to be in horrible situations. Same with the fire service. But one of the things that you notice is that human beings, and we sometimes fall into this trap that we think we should always be happy. We think that we should always have what we call positive emotions. We don't at Tignum even like the word positive emotions. They're feel-good emotions. But every emotion serves a purpose. And when we embrace all of our emotions, as it turns out, they provide amazing insight into what we're feeling, why we're feeling that way, into our personal growth. They take us out of our comfort zone. Embracing the suck is a part of that, right? And there's a process that we teach around embracing the suck. So first, recognizing what is it that I'm feeling? We call that emotion labeling. So pulling apart, am I angry or am I just frustrated? Am I tired or am I, feeling defeated? But when I get precise about what I feel, my brain can get control over that emotion. So that's really important. The second step is to apply a breathing technique that separates my physical response from the suck, because the suck tends to create a lot of drama, and that drama then creates a stress response. So the breathing we use is called box breathing. Breathing in on a count of 4, holding for a count of 4, out on a count of 4, inhaling again on a count, or exhaling on a count of 4. So that 4-4-4-4 breath separates my emotional response. 4 of them takes me 1 minute, so it's quick. Then what I do is I say, okay, faced with this bad situation, what are my options? What are my choices? And as I write down my choices, what I start to get is clarity that there's sometimes they're all bad, but there's some that are possible and some that are out of my control. So which choice can I make? That immediately puts the brain back in control. And then I pick that choice and I take the first step towards that choice. Now, what's amazing about this, and I've noticed this in the fire service, but I've also noticed it in business. When you're faced with a tough challenge, I mentioned COVID before, but even a reorganization or a drug study that failed or a challenge that we face, it is amazing when everyone embraces the suck in a high performance way. It creates amazing energy and rallies us and creates new thinking and problem solving and curiosity. So when we approach suck as something that we can embrace and learn from and grow, I think that there's amazing possibilities there. It's just so different than becoming dramatic. I'm a victim, you're a villain, I'm helpless. That doesn't get us anywhere.
Something you mentioned in there around when you're going through those choices, what can you actually control? And that's something that I've heard you mention before, and in fact was talking to my wife about, of don't worry about things that you can't control. And that's such an important one, that so many of us worry about things that actually there's absolutely nothing we can do about it. So why waste your time and the effort worrying about something you have no control over? I know that's something you felt strongly about.
Yeah, at the same time, you have to recognize that the brain is hardwired to want to focus on things out of our control. In nature, the things that we can't control are the things that may kill us. So in today's world, though, there's so much out of our control, it would consume our brain. And so you're exactly right. I have to start to become aware of, and that's something that I like the concept of. I'm aware of it and I'm tracking it, but I know that I can't control it, so I'm not going to put any energy or focus there. Instead, I'm going to put some focus somewhere else. Now, when I'm aware of things that are out of my control, I do keep just a little bit of an eye on them to see when something pops up that could be a problem that I now can control. So I don't like to be Pollyanna about it, and just cliche. Hey, just control the controllables. It all sounds good, but it's not so easy all the time.
Similar in curiosity, Scott, right? So embrace the suck. And one of the things we need in curiosity is failure. Right? We need to be out there. We need to try things, to experiment. And then essentially, if we're going to stop every time something goes wrong, then our curiosity is going to die. Is going to die pretty quickly. You talk also about the sort of gap between our day-to-day performance and our potential as well. Could you tell us a little bit more about how we use some of these techniques and this mindset ideas you're sharing with us about recognizing and living up to our potential?
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, potential can be an extremely scary thing. How good can you be, Paul? And then you're like, oh my God, I don't know. What if I'm only at a fraction? What if I'm failing right now? So we do have an inherent fear of how good can we be. We recognize that. So one of the ways we try to bridge that is we believe that human beings cannot outperform our own self-image. At the same time, we are the only creature on earth that can purposefully create our self-image. So we do an exercise called the to be vision, which is to create the self-image that you want. Part of what we do is build into that self-image this almost quest for failure, right? This quest to learn, this quest to be curious, this quest to not fear the unknown. And so when you build it into who you are, suddenly that's totally different. Now, people always ask us at Tignum, how do you measure the success of the work you do? And if I'm honest, If I helped you create, and Simon, you mentioned that you still have your to-be vision, this version of you at your best with a little bit of a stretch, and that stretch is constantly pulling you towards that full potential, I would argue all we care about is you becoming that person. So we literally score it. We take sentence by sentence. So, I mean, I'll read to you, I'll open mine real quick and just read to you my first sentence. So I'll just give you an example of how you can do that. I ask for and use others' feedback to reflect on how I am doing. So I might at the end of the day go, how did I do on a scale of 1 to 10? Did I ask for feedback? Was I interested, or did I avoid feedback? You know, did I reflect on how I am doing after a meeting or throughout my day? And then I score it on a scale of 1 to 10. And what we have found at Tignum is when each sentence in my to-be vision, I'm an 8 or higher, I'm usually on fire, which means I'm getting that towards that potential. I'm growing. And then sometimes, this happened to me over the summer during my summer break. For the first time ever, I'm embarrassed to say, we took 2 full weeks off. We traveled through some parks where we were outdoors and hiking. And on the way home, I was so inspired, I rewrote my to-be vision. Where do I want to stretch myself next? And so I built in some new elements into it. That in itself is how I achieve this potential. I'm constantly coming back and going, where do I want to go next? And so that mindset, I think, is built into a sustainable human performer, someone that really wants to make an impact.
Yeah, I would strongly agree with that. And I think linked to confidence as well. We haven't talked with you about confidence. So you don't mind, I want to ask you about confidence, because one of the things that we've sort of found through our research on curiosity is that being curious and I imagine identifying what your to-be vision is, your potential, it requires confidence, and the two inform each other. And I can imagine doing a check, a little audit for yourself and go, I was an 8 on that. Hey, that's pretty good. As opposed to, that was another day. I didn't quite deliver what I really wanted to do in that meeting. Could you talk a bit about how confidence is linked to potential? Because certainly from a curiosity point of view, we know it's very strongly linked.
Yeah. And so you heard me say that I think a leader is the chief belief builder within a team. Well, self-belief, you could call that also confidence, is so critical to our success. So we actually have a whole process that we take our clients through to build self-belief. And the reason is because there's nothing worse than when you think you should be better, or people tell you you're good, but you don't really believe it. And so one of the things we do is we use a reflection exercise. Let's go back and look at your last 6 months and let's figure out, what did you do well? What did you fail at and learn from? What did you learn over the last 6 months? And when you start to thread that out, you start to get proof that you actually should believe in yourself. Now, you don't ultimately believe that I will always succeed, because I know that I won't always succeed. What I do ultimately believe, and this comes to, I think, authentic confidence, is that, number one, if I fail, I'm going to be okay, because I know I'm going to learn from it. And then number two, that I'm not afraid to try new things, to try the untried. And so I think this whole opportunity of self-belief from an exercise of proving it to yourself, and it started with, we're working with the Arizona State University baseball team, one of the top baseball teams in college sports. And what I realized with a lot of these athletes is they've been the best on every team they've ever played on. And now they're surrounded by other great players. And it's really unnerving. And every one of them starts to doubt themselves. Same thing happens in business as we've coached people, and then they get into the C-suite, and now they have this huge amount of self-doubt. Well, we go back and we say, let me prove to you why you deserve to be where you are. What it doesn't guarantee is that you're going to be successful. You're going to have to keep moving. You're going to have to keep learning. You didn't just get there. And so this concept of building self-belief is built in also to our mindset tools. And it's a critical element. And it's something that you're 100% right. Teams, I always say, why should a leader be the chief belief builder? Because number one, I should help you believe in yourself. Then I should help teammates believe in each other. And then I should help them believe in me. And I do that through vulnerability, authenticity, being prepared, the way I show up. And then most important, I should have to concisely be able to communicate where we're going so that you can believe in our direction, in our goals, in our strategy. When all 4 of those things align, you get a very, very high energy, high performing team.
Fantastic.
Right. I would agree 100%. And I very much like how you link your ability to be confident into recognizing and acknowledging that you're going to fail. And actually, that's just part of it. And that's not a bad thing. It's helping you build more confidence. I want to ask you, you seem to be continually checking in on yourself and learning and assessing. What are you personally most curious about at the moment, Scott?
Well, one of the things I'm most curious about now is burnout. And because it's being talked about more and more. And the thing that makes me curious about it is I find that people misuse language. They're tired, but then they say they're burned out. And what happens when I say that I'm burnt out? It takes on a life of its own, and it creates a psychosomatic scenario where I start to prove that I'm burned out. I start to contribute like all this evidence of look how hard I'm working, look at how many meetings, and it can be a little dangerous because when I look at the highest performing teams, I'm sometimes blown away at how much work they've done, the obstacles they've overcome, the amount of stress that they've endured, and yet no one's burned out. They're all inspired and they just did something amazing. So there must be more to it, and we're trying to really peel that back at Tignum now and look at those things. And a lot of the strategies that we're talking about, we know as a side effect, their intention is to help you show up at your best and make the most out of your moments to make the biggest impact. But the side effect is your chance of burning out is reduced significantly. But even our mindset as we approach stress, if my mindset is that stress will make me stronger, I approach it totally different than if I approach it, stress is going to make me burn out. And so the concept or the talk around burnout has really got us curious right now because we're afraid that people are going to approach it where we're now going to start labeling people. And then once we label people, now that takes on a life of its own. And then we start to create divisions. And so it can be very dangerous. And so we feel like our approach to sustainable human performance has a huge role in alleviating a lot of burnout. Not all of it, because there's a lot of factors in it, but that's probably where we're most curious right now.
Right. Thank you.
So is there anything maybe you'd like to ask us, Scott? Any questions you're curious about from us?
Yeah. So as you guys do all these interviews and as you guys learn more and more about curiosity, I'm curious about what you've learned over the last year that you didn't know before, maybe something that surprised you about curiosity.
That's a great question. I think one of the big things was I've learned how little I knew at the start, if you like. So it's one of those things that the more you learn, the more you realize there is to learn. I think there's many things around the benefits of it that weren't initially as maybe well proven as sort of evidence has come out. So we were talking, for example, to Spencer Harrison in one of the podcasts, and he was sharing research he was doing with CEOs and looking at sort of over the long term, the curiosity of CEOs and leadership teams and the impact that can have on their organizations and their strategic success, and was finding very positive links there between the curiosity level of a CEO and their advisory team and that business's performance. And that was something in our sort of early research, it was hinted at was the sort of the success there, but having evidence across many large companies to be able to see that linkage was fantastic. And that was a big learning rather than a more a micro level, but actually seeing it at an enterprise macro level was fantastic.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
I think my favorite is that we are genuinely wired to be curious as humans. And even the researchers in Netherlands have recently discovered it, I think even this year, that there's circuitry in our brain that is actually underlying our need to seek new things, seek novelty, and be curious and turn that into action. So it's something that we don't even have to fight and say, we're not very good at being curious. Actually, it's something we are designed, or it's part of our DNA to do. So to then use curiosity to our advantage and to really see how we can learn about it, but we can actually use it to amplify what we achieve ourselves in our lives. So I think for me, that's been really powerful. And something, again, like like the work you're talking about, it can be something that you can just remind yourself every day. Am I being curious about this? Can I just go into that meeting with a curious mindset, not a I know the answers mindset? It is a really powerful state change.
You can literally build it into your self-image statement, your to-be vision. I ask great questions, or something, right, that already stimulates you, and you go, what does that look like? What do I need to do to ask great questions? And it is funny that you say that, Paul, about being born, because I have a 10-month-old grandson and a 7-year-old granddaughter. And if you don't believe that human beings are built to be curious or born to be curious, watch these kids. So then you ask yourself, I got curious about, well, what do we do to squash that curiosity? And then you look at how we, quit asking so many questions, quit messing with that, quit looking there, quit. And then I think about it like, we should be doing exactly the opposite. We should reward it like, oh my gosh, look what you found out. Look at how you learned that. I think I totally agree. If we fertilize curiosity from the time we're young, it'd be amazing how we would be as adults.
I think the research shows 4 years old is when we're at our most curious. And then exactly as you say, as well-meaning parents, but we steer people away from being so curious.
Yeah. How much of our political strife across the world could be solved with curiosity? It's fascinating, actually.
Completely. Yeah, completely. Very powerful. So what a conversation. I know we're coming towards the end of our time. So we've touched lots of exciting areas. So going through from how can we have a high-performing brain, we covered the 4 areas that you cover within Tignum around mindset, nutrition, recovery, movement, and the importance also of preparation with things like hydration, how do we prime our brain, the importance of recovery breaks, and how we definitely shouldn't feel guilty about taking time out for recovery breaks, movement, and the power of intention setting. We talked about transitions, and even when we haven't got that commuting transition, note on the back of the door that, am I ready to go and see the family yet, or step out of my work mode into my home mode. I think there's a useful tip I will add onto my door over there. And how, we constantly reassess the situation and mindset as well. Embracing the suck. Learning from special operations teams and others of how do we get precise about what we feel, use the box breathing technique to stabilize ourselves, and then what are the choices that we can actually make. And then a good last lesson of we cannot outperform our self-image. So how do we build that self-belief and become our chief belief builder? So we covered a lot in a fairly short time.
We sure did.
Yeah. Any one thing you would want to leave our listeners with, Scott, if you could choose one thing to highlight or leave them as a message?
Yeah, I think, all of us, we tend to underestimate how important personal readiness is. We come functionally ready. We go to college. We learn for our jobs. We have role readiness in the sense that we've built up experience for the role that we're in. But the real unlocker, the multiplier, I think, of the impact we can make is our personal readiness. And most of us don't show up at our best. And so therefore, if you're not showing up at your best, you're leaving it to chance, you're winging it. And that to me is sad.
So what can we do to show up at our best? Plenty of tips through the course of the conversation. Thank you so much, Scott.
Thank you, Scott.
Really good to talk to you, and really appreciate it. So people can find you where? Through tignum.com, or what's the best way for people to contact you?
Yeah, www.tignum.com. We have Tignum Thoughts that we put out at every other week, which are blogs. We have a Thoughtcast similar to you, doing a podcast around sustainable human performance and how we can show up at our best. And so you can find us on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts. We're pretty easy to find.
Perfect. So queue up your next podcast and check out Scott's podcast now. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
You've been listening to a Curious Advantage podcast. We're curious to hear from you. So if you think there was something useful or valuable from this conversation, please do write a review for the podcast on your preferred channel, saying what it was that you learnt and why you found it so valuable. We always appreciate hearing our listeners' thoughts and having a curious conversation. So join us today at #CuriousAdvantage. Curious Advantage book is available on Amazon worldwide. Order your copy now to further explore the 7 C's model for being more curious. Subscribe today and keep exploring curiously. See you next time.
Thank Thank you for listening to the Curious Advantage podcast.
The Curious Advantage book is now available to purchase on Amazon.
Stay tuned for the next episode and keep exploring curiously. This podcast is produced by Aliki Palinelli and John McGinty and edited by Jill Damatak-Futter.